The glass door of the small, bustling restaurant swung open with a soft chime, letting in a gust of cool city air that momentarily cut through the warmth of the dining room. It was a busy afternoon, the kind where the waitstaff rushes between tables with arms full of plates, and the noise level is a steady hum of conversation, clinking silverware, and hissing espresso machines. In the middle of this organized chaos, a young woman stepped inside. She didn't walk in with the lightness of someone looking forward to a meal. She moved with the heavy, deliberate steps of someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. From a distance, you could see the exhaustion etched into her face. She looked like she hadn't had a full night's sleep in days, perhaps weeks. Her hair was pulled back in a messy attempt to look tidy, loose strands falling around her face which she brushed away with a tired motion. But it was what she was carrying that told the real story. In one arm, she held a toddler who was clearly not in a good mood. The child was squirming, whining, and looking around the bright room with wide, unhappy eyes. In her other hand, she gripped a large, overflowing diaper bag that looked heavy enough to tip her over. Slung over her other shoulder was a purse that kept slipping down her arm. She paused just inside the door, her eyes scanning the room for an empty table. It was a moment of hesitation that every parent knows all too well, that split second of fear where you hope your child doesn't decide to have a meltdown right there in the entrance. The restaurant was packed. People were laughing, eating, and enjoying their lunches, completely unaware of the struggle playing out near the host stand. A few heads turned to look at the new arrivals, some with curiosity, others with a quick glance of annoyance that the silence had been broken by the restless child. The mother shifted the toddler to her other hip, murmuring soft, soothing words that were lost in the noise of the room. "Just a minute, sweetie, we will sit down soon," she seemed to be saying, though her tight smile suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as the child. She took a few steps forward, navigating the narrow aisle between tables. It was an obstacle course of chairs and legs. As she walked, the diaper bag swung and bumped into a chair, drawing a sharp look from a man sitting nearby. She mouthed a silent, "sorry," and kept moving. Her face flushing a shade of pink with embarrassment. It was clear she was doing this alone. There was no partner to take the bags, no one to distract the toddler while she figured out where to sit. She was a solo unit, trying to hold everything together while gravity and a cranky child seemed to be working against her. The toddler let out a loud, frustrated cry, kicking his legs against her side. She winced but didn't stop. She just held on tighter, whispering promises of milk and crackers. Finally, she spotted a small table in the corner, slightly tucked away from the main flow of traffic. It felt like a sanctuary to her. She made her way toward it, practically dragging her feet by the time she reached the chair. The ordeal of just getting to a seat had taken a toll. She wasn't just hungry. She was drained in a way that goes beyond physical tiredness. It was the kind of mental exhaustion that comes from constant vigilance, from never being able to fully relax because you are the only one responsible for another human being's well-being. As she tried to lower herself into the chair, the strap of her purse slid off her shoulder again, tangling with the diaper bag. For a second, she was a mess of straps and bags and a wriggling child. She let out a small, breathless sigh, nearly dropping everything. It was a moment of pure vulnerability. She looked around, half hoping someone would see, half praying no one was watching. Most people, however, were too busy with their own food and conversations to notice the woman fighting for dignity in the corner, but in the opposite corner of the room, sitting quietly at a small table by himself, was a man who noticed everything. He was dressed simply, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a worn-out jacket. He had finished his meal a while ago, but was lingering over a cup of coffee, enjoying the rare moment of anonymity. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading a book. He was just watching the room, observing the flow of life around him. He saw the young mother the moment she walked in. Perhaps it was because he knew what it felt like to carry a heavy load, or maybe he just had a keen eye for people in distress. He watched her struggle with the door. He saw the way she shifted the weight of the child. He noticed the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks when she bumped into the chair. He didn't stare with judgment. He watched with a quiet intensity, his eyes soft with understanding. To the other customers, she was just a noisy interruption to their lunch. To him, she was a person who needed a break, a person who was working harder than anyone else in the room just to exist. He saw the way her hands trembled slightly as she finally managed to get the toddler seated in the high chair provided by the staff. He saw the deep exhale she released, the one that signaled she had survived the entrance but was terrified of what came next. The restaurant was loud, filled with the sounds of plates being cleared and laughter. But in that corner, a silent drama was unfolding. The mother was trying to organize the table, unpacking crackers, wiping the child's hands, and keeping an eye on her belongings, all while trying to decide what she could afford to order that wouldn't take too long to eat. The stress radiated off her like heat. She looked up briefly, scanning the room again, her eyes glassy with unshed tears of frustration. She felt incredibly alone in a room full of people. The man in the cap took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't make a move yet. He didn't want to embarrass her. He knew that sometimes kindness can feel like pity if it isn't handled carefully. He just watched, waiting for the right moment, observing the human struggle of a mother doing her best. The restaurant went on around them, indifferent and noisy, but a connection of empathy was forming across the room. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was a witness to her reality, and he was about to decide that just watching wasn't enough. For a brief moment, it seemed like sitting down might solve everything. The mother let out a long, shaky breath as she settled into the wooden chair, finally releasing the tension in her arms that had been holding her child tight. She quickly placed the diaper bag on the empty seat beside her, as if guarding it, and immediately began to rummage through it. She was looking for something, anything, that would keep the toddler entertained for just a few minutes. A cracker, a small toy, a brightly colored book. Her hands moved frantically through the pockets, pushing aside wipes and extra clothes, but toddlers operate on their own timeline, and this little one was done with being patient. Before she could find a distraction, the child let out a shriek that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a sharp knife. It wasn't a sad cry. It was an angry, frustrated yell. The small fist began to bang on the high chair tray. The mother flinched, her body stiffening as she realized the calm she hoped for wasn't going to happen. "Please, not now," she whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible. She tried to offer a sippy cup, but the toddler slapped it away. The cup hit the edge of the table and tumbled to the floor, rolling a few feet away under a nearby table. The mother closed her eyes for a split second, fighting back the urge to cry. She knew she had to get it. She couldn't leave a mess on the floor. And the child needed the drink. She stood up carefully, maneuvering around the table. Just as she leaned down to reach for the cup, the toddler decided to grab the single, heavy spoon left on the tray. With a swing of the arm, the spoon went flying. It didn't just fall. It clattered loudly against the metal chair leg and then spun onto the tiled floor with a distinct, jingling noise that turned heads. The sound was like a trigger in the quiet corner of the room. Conversations at the tables closest to her stopped abruptly. A couple 2 tables away stopped eating and looked over, their expressions shifting from neutral to visibly annoyed. An older woman sitting by the window frowned, shaking her head slowly in that universal gesture of disapproval that cuts deep. The mother felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't a warm blush. It was a hot, prickly sensation of shame that started at her neck and spread to her ears. She felt exposed, as if a spotlight had been turned on her and her inadequacies as a parent. She grabbed the cup and the spoon, her hands trembling slightly. When she sat back up, she couldn't make eye contact with anyone. She focused entirely on wiping the spoon with a napkin, her movements jerky and nervous. The toddler was now screaming in full force, the sound echoing off the walls. It was the kind of scream that makes your ears ring, the kind that demands attention and refuses to be ignored. People were staring now. It wasn't just a glance. It was open staring. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her. Why can't she control him? Why is he so loud? Why doesn't she just leave? Inside she was panicking. She just wanted to order a cup of coffee and maybe a sandwich, something to keep her going, but she couldn't even look at the menu. She felt trapped. If she left now, she would have to pack everything back up, carry the screaming child through the restaurant again, and go back out into the cold with no food. If she stayed, she had to endure this humiliation. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She felt a lump form in her throat. She was a good mother. She tried so hard every single day, but in this moment, none of that mattered. In this moment, she felt like a failure. The waiter arrived at the table, looking a bit flustered himself. He stood awkwardly, holding a notepad, waiting for a break in the screaming to take her order. But the break didn't come. The toddler was arching his back, trying to climb out of the high chair, his face red and wet with tears. The mother looked at the waiter, her eyes pleading for understanding. She tried to speak, to ask for water, but her voice was drowned out by another wail from her child. She looked down at the table, feeling tears prick her own eyes. She couldn't hold them back much longer. The pressure was too much. The isolation of being surrounded by people who were angry at her for simply existing was crushing across the room. The man in the baseball cap hadn't taken his eyes off her. While others looked away in annoyance or stared in judgment, he watched with a look of deep, quiet concern. He saw the way her shoulders shook slightly. He noticed that she wasn't getting angry at the child. She was just trying to survive the moment. He saw the tears welling up in her eyes before she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. He recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had reached their absolute limit. It wasn't just a bad moment. It was a breaking point. He knew that feeling of the world closing in, of feeling like you are underwater and can't catch a breath. To the rest of the restaurant, she was a nuisance. To him, she was a human being in pain, doing her absolute best in a difficult situation. He saw a woman who needed someone to simply acknowledge that she was doing a good job, that it was okay, that she wasn't alone. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away for him. He didn't hear the clatter of the kitchen or the chatter of the patrons. He only saw the distress of the mother and the overwhelming chaos of the small child. He saw the way she stroked the child's hair gently, even while she cried herself. That small act of love amidst the frustration told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't neglectful. She was overwhelmed. The difference was vast, but only a patient eye could see it. The waiter at her table was shifting his weight, looking eager to get away from the noise. The mother was frantically trying to apologize to him, mouthing, "I'm sorry," over and over again between shushing her son. She felt smaller than she had ever felt. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. The judgment hung heavy in the air around her table, pushing down on her shoulders. She picked up the menu, but the words were a blur. She couldn't read them. She just held it up like a shield, trying to hide her face from the room. The man in the corner took a slow breath. He didn't see a scene to be annoyed by. He saw an opportunity. He saw a moment where a simple act of kindness could change the entire trajectory of this woman's day. The indifference of the crowd was suffocating her, but he refused to be part of the crowd. He decided right then, as he watched a single tear escape her eye and roll down her cheek, that he wasn't going to sit back and watch her struggle alone. The silence of the restaurant wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hostile, and he was about to break it. The man in the corner didn't hesitate. He didn't look around for approval, and he didn't check to see if anyone was watching him. He simply pushed his chair back, the wooden legs making a soft, scraping sound against the floor that was barely audible over the noise of the toddler's cries. He stood up, smoothing the front of his simple jacket, and began to walk across the restaurant. It wasn't a hurried walk. It was calm and steady, purposeful but not aggressive. As he moved away from his table, the atmosphere in the room began to shift in a strange, ripple-like effect. People who were facing away from him turned to see who was moving. A hush started to fall over the nearest tables. Heads began to turn, and whispers started to spread like electricity through a wire. One by one, patrons recognized the face beneath the baseball cap. It was unmistakable, even without the usual Hollywood lighting. It was the man from the movies, the actor known for his kindness on screen and, apparently, his humility off it. But in that moment, nobody rushed him for an autograph. They were too stunned by the direction he was walking. He wasn't heading for the exit to escape the noise. He was walking straight toward the epicenter of the chaos, the crying child and the weeping mother. The mother was still trapped in her bubble of misery, her head down, trying to coax the toddler into taking a breath. She heard footsteps approaching, but didn't look up. She assumed it was the manager coming to ask them to leave, or perhaps another customer ready to complain. She braced herself for the harsh words she was sure were coming, her body tensing up like a coiled spring. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "Hey there, little guy," a soft, deep voice said. The mother froze. The voice wasn't angry. It was gentle, warm, and strangely calming. It was a voice that sounded like an old friend. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes blurry with tears, ready to defend herself. But when she looked up, the words died in her throat. Standing right next to their small, cramped table was the last person she expected to see. The actor was there, looking down at them, not with judgment or annoyance, but with a soft smile. He didn't look at her first, though. He turned his attention entirely to the screaming toddler. He ignored the fact that the child was red-faced and loud. He just crouched down. This was the moment that stopped the room. Here was a famous celebrity, someone who could be anywhere in the world, and he was squatting down on the dirty floor of a restaurant next to a high chair. He lowered himself until he was eye level with the crying boy. He didn't try to shush him or tell him to stop. Instead, he did something unexpected. He made a face. It was a silly, exaggerated expression, crossing his eyes and puffing out his cheeks. A playful look that was so full of charm that it cut right through the toddler's anger. The child screaming abruptly hitched. He stopped mid-wail, staring at this strange new face with wide, wet eyes. The sudden silence was shocking. The toddler let out a confused little breath, then a tiny giggle. The tension in the air broke instantly. The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound, and reached into his own pocket. He pulled out a small, clean tissue, just a normal thing anyone would have, and gently wiped the toddler's tear-stained cheek. "You're okay," he whispered to the child, his voice full of reassurance. "It's all right." The mother sat there, paralyzed. Her mouth was slightly open, her heart pounding a different rhythm now, not from panic, but from pure disbelief. She watched as this stranger, this movie star, treated her son with such tenderness. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was connecting with a small child. Then the man turned his attention to her. He shifted his position so he could look her in the eyes, but he stayed low, keeping his presence non-threatening. He saw the tears on her face and the trembling of her hands. His expression softened even more, if that was possible. He didn't look at her like she was a bad mother. He looked at her like she was a warrior who had been fighting a battle alone for too long. "You are doing a really great job," he said. His tone was serious, sincere. He wanted her to hear him, really hear him. "It's tough. I know. You're doing great." It felt like the weight of the world was lifted off her shoulders just by those few simple sentences. Nobody had told her that in a long time. She tried to speak, to say thank you or to apologize for the noise, but her voice cracked. She just nodded, a fresh wave of tears coming, but this time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of relief. Without waiting for her to say anything, the actor noticed the spoon and cup that had fallen to the floor earlier. He didn't call a waiter to clean it up. He reached down and picked them up himself. He placed them back on the table with a quiet clatter. Then he reached for the napkin dispenser on their table, pulled out a few napkins, and began to wipe the spilled milk from the tray of the high chair. The mother tried to stop him. "Oh, no, please, you don't have to do that," she stammered, finally finding her voice. She reached out her hand to take the napkins from him. He gently shook his head, stopping her hand with a calm gesture. "I got it," he said simply. "Sit down. Catch your breath." It wasn't an order. It was a permission. She realized she was still standing, half ready to run away. Slowly, she sank back into her chair. The restaurant was dead silent now. Every person in the room was watching. But the silence had changed. It was no longer a silence filled with judgment. It was a silence filled with respect. People were witnessing a masterclass in empathy. Even the waiter, who had looked so flustered moments ago, was standing still a few feet away, holding his notepad, just watching. The actor finished wiping the tray and threw the dirty napkins onto a spare plate. He looked back at the mother, who was finally able to take a deep, full breath. Her son was now happily chewing on a cracker, watching the man with wide eyes, completely calm. "He's beautiful," the man said, nodding toward the toddler. "You have a beautiful boy. Don't worry about anyone else. Just enjoy your lunch." He straightened up slowly, his knees probably popping a bit after the crouch, but he didn't show it. He adjusted his jacket and gave her one last, genuine smile, a smile that reached his eyes. It was a look that said, "I see you, and you matter." He didn't ask for a photo. He didn't make a big speech. He just stepped back, allowing the space around her to feel normal again. The intervention was quiet, physical, and incredibly effective. The crisis was over, not because the child stopped crying, but because the mother was no longer alone in handling it. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence anymore. It was a peaceful pause, the kind that settles in after a rainstorm. The toddler, now mesmerized by the stranger's kindness, sat quietly in his high chair, happily chewing on the cracker the man had helped him find. His little legs swung back and forth, kicking the chair legs gently, the earlier rage completely gone. The mother sat across from him, her hands still resting on the table, but the tightness in her fingers had loosened. She was breathing normally again, her chest rising and falling in a slow, deep rhythm. She watched her son for a moment, unable to believe the transformation. Just 5 minutes ago, she felt like her world was falling apart. She felt like everyone in the room hated her. Now she felt a strange sense of calm washing over her. She looked up to thank the man again, to find the words that had failed her earlier, but he was already a step ahead. He didn't want to linger and make her feel like a charity case. He gave her a soft, reassuring nod, a silent signal that said, "It's okay. You're good now," and then turned his attention to the waiter who was hovering nearby. The waiter, a young man with a weary face, looked confused but attentive. He had come over expecting to clear plates or take an order, but the actor waved him down gently. The waiter leaned in, expecting a complaint about the noise or a request for more napkins. Instead, the man in the cap spoke in a low, calm voice, barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. He didn't make a big show of pulling out his wallet or waving money around. It was a discreet, quiet conversation. He simply asked for the mother's bill to be added to his own tab. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of cash. It wasn't just a single bill for the food. It was a thick stack. He placed it on the small tray the waiter was holding, covering the cost of the meal and then some. He told the waiter to ensure the mother knew everything was taken care of, including whatever she wanted to order for herself, and to make sure the rest of the staff was well compensated for any trouble the noise might have caused. The waiter's eyes went wide. He looked at the cash, then at the movie star, and then over at the mother, who was wiping her son's face and trying to smooth her own hair. The waiter opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to tell him it was too much or to thank him, but the actor just offered a humble smile and turned away. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want a handshake. He just wanted it done. The waiter walked over to the mother's table, but he moved slowly, almost reverently. He placed the check face down on the table, but instead of walking away, he stood there for a moment. The mother looked up, her guard going up slightly again. She was worried he was going to tell her they had to leave because her son was being too loud earlier. She reached for her purse, her fingers fumbling with the zipper, preparing to pay quickly and get out. "Ma'am," the waiter said, his voice unusually soft. "Actually, you don't need to worry about the bill." The mother paused, her hand halfway into her purse. She looked at the waiter, confusion knitting her eyebrows together. "I'm sorry?" she asked. "I haven't ordered yet. I was just about to look at the menu." The waiter shook his head slightly, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, I mean, everything is taken care of. The gentleman over there," he nodded his head very subtly toward the corner, "he paid for your lunch. And he left a very generous tip for the kitchen staff as well." The mother turned her head so fast it almost gave her whiplash. She looked toward the corner table. The man was already gathering his jacket, ready to leave. He wasn't looking at her, seemingly busy with his own things. She felt a rush of shock flood through her system. It wasn't just about the money, although she knew how much she needed to save every dollar right now. It was the gesture. It was the fact that a stranger, a busy man with his own life, had seen her struggle and decided to lift that burden off her shoulders. "Oh," she whispered. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. She looked back at the waiter, her eyes starting to well up with tears again, but these were different tears. He didn't have to do that. I can't let him do that." "He insisted, ma'am," the waiter said, his voice warm. "He said you're doing a great job and to just enjoy your meal." "Order whatever you like. Take your time." The mother looked back at her son. The toddler was smiling now, drooling a little bit over his cracker, completely unaware that his lunch had just been bought by an action movie star. She let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her lungs for years. She felt her shoulders drop 3 inches. The financial stress of the meal, the worry about the cost of a coffee and a sandwich, the stress of tipping on a tight budget, it all vanished in an instant. She felt light. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was fighting a losing battle. She instinctively stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She knew she couldn't just let him walk away without saying thank you. She needed to look him in the eye and let him know what this meant to her. She needed him to know that he didn't just buy her lunch. He gave her hope. She took a step toward his table, clutching her purse to her chest, her heart pounding with gratitude. The restaurant was still watching. The judgment had completely evaporated. The other patrons, who had been annoyed just minutes before, were now smiling. Some were whispering to each other, pointing at the corner table with admiration. The mood in the room had completely flipped. It was no longer a place of irritation. It was a place witnessing a moment of pure grace. The air felt warmer, the lighting seemed softer, and the sounds of the kitchen became cheerful again. Everyone felt a little better just by seeing what happened. But as the mother took a step forward, the man in the cap stood up. He didn't walk toward her to accept her thanks. Instead, he simply shouldered his bag and checked his pockets to make sure he had everything. He moved with a quiet efficiency. He knew that if she tried to thank him, she might get emotional, or she might feel like she owed him something. He didn't want that. He wanted her dignity. He wanted her to sit back down and enjoy her meal like a normal person. He saw her moving toward him and offered just a small, polite raise of his hand, a gentle gesture to stop her. He didn't come over to receive a hug. He didn't wait for applause. He was already turning toward the door. He treated the entire interaction like it was the most natural thing in the world, like helping a neighbor move a couch or picking up a dropped item. It was casual, kind, and incredibly humble. He was just a man doing a good deed, and the fact that he did it without wanting anything in return made it hit even harder for everyone watching. The mother stopped in her tracks when she saw the gentle raise of his hand. It wasn't a command to go away, but rather a polite request to let him leave quietly. She understood immediately. She stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, her purse still clutched tightly against her chest, watching him walk away. She wanted to call out, to run after him and grab his hand, to tell him that he had just saved her day in a way he would never fully understand. But she respected his unspoken wish. She could see that he wasn't doing this for gratitude. He wasn't doing this to be thanked. He was doing it simply because he could. The actor adjusted his cap, pulling the brim down slightly lower, and walked toward the glass door with his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. His posture was relaxed, his steps unhurried. He moved through the restaurant as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. He didn't look left or right at the other patrons who were staring at him. He didn't bask in the admiration that was filling the room. He just kept his eyes forward, focused on the exit. As he reached the door, the waiter hurried over, holding it open for him. The actor paused for a split second. He looked at the young waiter, gave him a genuine nod of thanks, a simple acknowledgement of one human being to another, and stepped out into the afternoon. The bell above the door chimed a soft, clear note that seemed to signal the end of a scene in a movie. The heavy glass door swung shut, separating the warmth of the restaurant from the cool air outside. Through the glass, the mother could see his figure for just a moment longer. He didn't look back. He didn't glance over his shoulder to see if she was watching. He just turned the corner and disappeared into the flow of people on the sidewalk, vanishing as quickly and quietly as he had arrived. Inside, the restaurant remained still for a few heartbeats. It was a strange, suspended moment where nobody moved or spoke. The air felt different now. It felt lighter, cleaner somehow. The heaviness of judgment and annoyance that had hung over the room earlier had completely evaporated. In its place was a lingering sense of awe. People looked at each other with raised eyebrows and small smiles, sharing a look that said, "Did that really just happen?" Slowly, the mother turned away from the door. The adrenaline that had been pumping through her body began to fade, leaving her feeling a little shaky but incredibly warm. She walked back to her table and sat down heavily. The diaper bag was still on the chair next to her, and her son was still in the high chair, but everything felt different. She looked at the toddler, who was now happily smearing cracker crumbs on the tray, and let out a soft, breathless laugh. It was a real laugh, born of pure relief. She picked up the menu with a steady hand. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to count every penny in her head before choosing. She didn't have to choose the cheapest item just to get by. She could actually order something she wanted. She looked over at the waiter, who was hovering nearby with a notepad, a big smile on his face. "I'll have the club sandwich, please," she said, her voice sounding stronger than it had all day. "And a coffee. A large one." "Coming right up, ma'am," the waiter beamed at her, writing it down with a flourish. He treated her like a queen now, not a nuisance. He saw her differently because of how the actor had treated her. While she waited, she looked around the room. A few people were still glancing at her, but their expressions had completely changed. The annoyed looks were gone. In their place were nods of respect and gentle smiles. A woman at the table across the aisle caught her eye and gave her a warm, motherly thumbs up. The mother smiled back, feeling a connection with strangers that she hadn't felt when she first walked in. The barrier that had separated her, the barrier of a screaming child in public stress, had been broken down by an act of kindness. When the food arrived, it smelled wonderful. She took a bite of the sandwich, and for a moment she just closed her eyes and enjoyed it. She fed her son small pieces, watching him giggle and kick his feet. The terrible mother she felt like 20 minutes ago was gone. She felt capable again. She felt like she could handle the rest of the day. That simple act of someone seeing her struggle and stepping in to help had given her back her dignity. It reminded her that she wasn't invisible, and that kindness still existed in the world. The rest of her meal passed in a peaceful blur. She took her time. She didn't rush to pack up her bags the second the last bite was taken. She drank her coffee slowly, savoring the warmth. She watched the people coming and going, feeling a sense of calm she had missed for weeks. The restaurant noise no longer bothered her. It was just the sound of life happening. Eventually she knew it was time to go. She wiped the table down carefully, even though the waiter would do it, because that was just who she was. She gathered the diaper bag, settled the toddler on her hip, and picked up her purse. She felt heavy again, the physical weight of the child, and the bags was still there, but her heart was light. She walked toward the door to leave. As she passed the table where the actor had sat, she paused for a second. It was empty now, just a coffee cup and a folded napkin left behind. It looked like any other empty table, but to her, it was a monument to a life-changing moment. She looked out the glass door onto the busy street, wondering which way he had gone. Realizing she would probably never see him again, she pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool air. The city was loud and busy, just as it was before, but it didn't feel hostile anymore. She felt a bit more courage as she started walking down the sidewalk. She knew the days ahead would still be hard. Parenting alone would still be exhausting. There would be other meltdowns, other stressful moments in public places. But she also knew that she had survived today, and she had survived it with a little help from a friend. She never knew she had. The story didn't end with a grand speech or a round of applause. It ended with a mother walking home, holding her child close, feeling a little bit stronger than she did before. And somewhere in the city, a man in a baseball cap continued his walk, anonymous and quiet, carrying the secret of his kindness. The silence of the restaurant had been broken, but the echo of that kindness would stay with everyone who witnessed it for a long, long time. It was a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or appear on movie screens. Sometimes they just sit in the corner of a diner, waiting for a chance to make the world a little softer for someone who needs it.